well. And you've every reason to be concerned because, security is still a major part of our industry, the point of sale industry. It is a concern. And I think I was surprised to see that in 2012, retail actually popped up a level in terms of the risk level that it's at. In fact, in 2012, 33% of all card breaches were in the retail sector, as opposed to in 2011, it was only 12%. So it seems to be that this industry is getting its fair share of problems around the place. And so you probably need to be concerned about payments. And I know in some of the other industries that we're associated with, restaurants, for example, some of the resellers in the restaurant space actually found themselves named on lawsuits when there was issues taking place. So it really is something that you have to pay attention to. We've seen over this last year some additional high-profile names suddenly added to the list of breaches that took place. So, we knew about TJ Maxx, Michaels had sort of surfaced over 2012s, and I think the latest one, the big one that came through, was Barnes & Noble and the issues that they were having with breaches. The fact is that the people that are perpetrating these breaches are actually getting smarter about the way they're doing it. And I think you see in this slide here that whereas it used to just be a matter of finding stuff lying around that wasn't in use on databases, perhaps old copies of information that was after you'd done an upgrade, you'd left some stuff there and it was earlier technology that wasn't perhaps so secure. It's actually now more data in transit. So the information that's moving around networks before it actually gets into secure databases, this is where people are getting smart and taking this information. So the threat is changing. That makes it hard, if you can plan to sort of secure something, but if all the time the threat is changing, how do you keep changing how you plan to secure it? I hate to say it, but it's not only the merchants that got breached. Last year, we also saw Global Payments come through as an acquirer that got breached. And so, it's all levels, all people within the chain of things have to be concerned about security. So the good news in this, of course, is the PCI Council has us covered. We've all seen lots of things coming out, and the things that have been coming out of here have just been spawning more and more and more acronyms. Honestly, it's scary, the level of acronyms that we see in this industry. I know this is a Microsoft-centric event, and I know Microsoft likes acronyms. I sat through some of their sessions previously, and I know that that's the case. But honestly, the PCI Council seems to have created more acronyms than anyone else. And is it any surprise that people in this room are probably saying, well, what's SRED? What's the difference between PADSS and PCI DSS? What's a CHD? What's a PFI? What's SRED? It's just so complicated. So confusion abounds, which is really a shame, seeing PCI DSS has been in the marketplace for more than 10 years now. You'd think after 10 years of having these standards in place, this would be crystal clear. It's not. What is clear, though, is merchants are spending ever more amounts of money in order to fight the PCI battle. So one data point I saw was level 1 merchants spend between $3.5 to $18 million annually on PCI. Wow, that's one merchant, one organization in a tier 1 area spending that level of money. So if we were to sort of multiply that by the number of tier 1, tier 2, etc. merchants in the business, how much does the retail sector spend on securing card information? I tried to find that information, and not surprisingly, it's not published anywhere. You can only find little pieces about it, but I think the amount would be a frightening amount of money that's being spent. The interesting piece is it seems to all be, in some ways, a little bit of a waste of time, because organizations like Barnes & Noble, I'm sure that they were pretty fastidious about the way they handled security in there. I'm sure they weren't cavalier about things, but they were breached. And in every situation where a breach has occurred, it's been found that the merchant was not PCI compliant at the time of the breach. And in some ways, maybe that's a little bit, of course they weren't. How could the PCI Council turn around and say, gosh, they were PCI compliant, but they were still breached? I mean, that wouldn't be a good thing. So, of course, the auditors find a way, the forensic analysis find a way of saying, aha, just before you were breached, this happened. And so you weren't actually PCI compliant. And of course, because they're not PCI compliant at the time of the breach, there's no safe harbor in terms of cost. So the merchant bears the cost of everything that happened in there, which now in the retail sector is over $174 per card breach. So as I said, criminals are getting smarter. The complexity is growing. So we went from having those original 12 security domains, 12 little bullet points that came out, and we all thought, well, that's going to be pretty easy. 12 points, I can live with that. But now the self-attestation that a merchant has to do for a SACD is got 280 data points on it that you have to comply with and answer. 280. Now, how did it go from 12 to 280? And will it stop? Will next year's be 300, 350, 400, 500? Is this just an escalator that we're on to some place that we don't know where it's going to be now? It is a concern. The good thing, I think, is that the industry is trying to say, how do we change? Fundamentally, we've got to do something a little bit different in our industry, because if we carry on doing what we do now, swiping cards the way we've done now and treating data the way we've done now, this is just going to keep getting more and more complicated. So I'm going to focus today on 3 interesting technologies, and it sounded like you were interested in them as well because you started to talk about them. But the 3 things that are coming at the moment, and what impact are they going to have on the way we do business and the way merchants work? The 3 I'm going to talk about is point-to-point encryption, P2PE, chip and pin, we talked a little bit about that, and also mobile. These are all the kind of interesting things that people are looking at. So what's point-to-point encryption, P2PE? Started life being called end-to-end encryption. And, we've heard about encryption for a long time in regards to the payment industry. So why is this any different? Well, the difference between it is that in most situations when we started to do any form of security, we encrypted data. And the applications that you had, whether it's the Microsoft retail application or whatever it was, would have the keys to decrypt that information, work with the card data, and then re-encrypt it to put it back in the hard drive. So the concern about this, of course, was if you've got encrypted data inside a PC, inside a server, and you've got the keys to decrypt it, how do you know that if someone comes along and takes your data, they don't take the keys as well? So the PCI Council said, you know what? Encrypted data is really card data. If the potential is there to lose the keys, what's the difference? Now, the difference here with point-to-point encryption is that the keys are never in the merchant's control. A merchant never has the encryption keys. It's passed through to some other entity. So the PCI Council has basically said, that's different. If you now have an environment where there is encrypted card data but no keys, then really you don't have what we call a card data environment. And that's the key thing. So for merchants, really the game today is, people talked about being out of scope for PCI. You can't be out of scope for PCI. You're in PCI. If you're taking payments, you're in PCI. But what you can do is manage the size and complexity of the card data environment. And that really is the goal for everyone in the room today, is how do you minimize the CDE that a merchant has? If you can make it go away completely, you really have changed things. And so point-to-point encryption says that if you can make that shrink down to just the device that's actually doing the reading, then maybe life should be easier. So how it's changing in real terms is the potential is there that the self-assessment questionnaire that a customer has to fill out now, that I said is 284 questions. That's a SACD. So that's a SACD, is a self-assessment questionnaire, level D. It's the sort of thing that most retail merchants, apart from the tier 1 merchants, have to do. It is based on the fact that they're probably storing card data. They can get a break and go down to a SAC-C, which is only 83 questions, if you don't store card data and if you segmented the network. But point-to-point encryption offers the ability to go down to only 12 questions. In fact, what they're really saying in this piece is you don't have to do anything other than make sure that you've got secure login approaches. So if all of your users have got their own secure login and they rotate passwords and the passwords are strong enough, you're done. because there is no card data in the environment. Now that's an exciting change for a merchant to be able to be like that, because gradually over time they can stop spending money on PCI and start spending money with you guys on point of sale refreshes and new software and new initiatives that are going to drive revenue to their business, and I think that's probably what they should be doing. There are a few little wrinkles around the P2PE piece is, if you handle data in other ways than just through your point of sale, so maybe you're faxing in, customers are faxing in or emailing in their card numbers, not a good idea by the way, but if they're sending things in, there's a few little extensions to it that might mean they have a few more questions. But that's a sizable change to go from the 284 to 12 questions. So, the thing that they have to do, of course, is have an approved P2PE solution. So what's an approved P2PE solution? Well, you go to the PCI website and there's a section in there that says approved PCI P2PE solutions. Guess what? There's none there. Not one product is listed on the PCI Council's website as an approved P2PE solution. And there are some reasons for that. Okay, the reasons for it is gradually the information about how to become approved is coming available. It hasn't been available up until now. And there are two things that you have to do in this process is you'll see there's an encryption area and a decryption area. So things about it is in a P2P environment, the merchant has a device that encrypts the card information, and somewhere further upstream, there's a provider that decrypts that information. So we talk about P2PE in those two ways. How is it encrypted? How and where is it decrypted? The first approach that came out was something you'll see around, and it's called P2PE hardware-hardware. No, we didn't just type things twice. That's hardware encryption and hardware decryption. So we're saying that the encryption is done within a device. The device is the swiper that you have, and those specific devices securely encrypt information. The decryption, they're saying, is done in a hardware security module, an HSM. Interesting. So what is an HSM? Well, it's basically a kind of black box that you can put into your network, and it's got a secure perimeter in there, and supposedly it guards the information and takes care of the process inside it. It's kind of a little scary to people that are in the business, because this HSM is now this black box that you as an organization don't actually understand what goes on inside it and how it works and who actually updates the security of the HSM. We actually got a few in our office just to have a look at it, and we found that they were actually Linux-based boxes. Am I allowed to say Linux in here, by the way? I'm not sure. This is kind of Microsoft-centric approach. They were Linux boxes that hadn't been patched to latest revision levels, and there was no actual mechanism to upgrade the patches in there. So this sounded like a risk about to happen to us. So, the HSM approach, the hardware-hardware approach, maybe isn't the best approach for P2PE to move through. So the PCI Council in December released something called hardware hybrid. And in the hardware hybrid approach, there's hardware that encrypts the information, same sort of thing as we had before. And there's a hybrid solution that manages the decryption. And when we say hybrid, it's a combination of, yet again, an HSM and a software process. And it's hybrid on the basis that you don't have to use the HSM for decryption. You only have to use the HSM to store the keys. And you can use a software process to actually handle the decryption. That's still got the same weak link in there as this HSM, and I wonder whether it really is a step forward. But we got those specifications into the industry out in December. They were promised to us in 2012. They came out in December. In 2013, we're going to get the final piece in this, which is hardware-software. So now there'll be something called P2PE hardware-software. And hardware-software means still the same hardware encryption device, but now any form of software process can decrypt it. And that means that organizations like us can have their full license to go and create solutions that we believe are secure. And the funny thing about this is we're waiting for these P2PE standards to come out, yet us, as an example, Shift4 is already a Tier 1 certified service provider under Visa and the Card Association's branding. So we adhere to the highest level that is expected of us already. But somehow we've got to wait for this P2PE hardware-software solution to tell us how we could be certified, even though we've been managing keys for years. So this is really what's been holding up why there are no P2PE solution providers listed on PCI Council's website. It's the specifications haven't come out. So they're only just arriving now, and it's going to be a period of time for them to become listed. So my expectation is you'll probably see P2PE applications and P2PE solution providers start to appear on the PCI Council's websites during 2013. And I've been talking about the hardware encryption level. So these are the kind of devices that I'm expecting that we'll see out there. So, top left is kind of the magstripe reader, pretty standard, no surprises to that. It looks and feels exactly the same. In fact, nowadays, if you go and buy a reader that's not encrypted, it's probably the same device inside with the encryption turned off that you would buy if you bought an encrypted one. We see these kind of blended devices that have keyboards on them. So why is that important? Well, think about it, is if you couldn't swipe a card, so if that card wouldn't read through a swiper, how are you going to key the manual entry into a system? Because by keying the manual entry into the system, haven't you just introduced card information into that system? And isn't that what you were trying to avoid in the first place through P2PE? So we're going to have to see these devices sitting outside that not only have swipers on there, but also have keypads on them so that you can handle a manual key entry. The same P2PEs devices are turning up on mobile phones and on tablets. So the swipes that take place on those devices are secured by that. And of course, the pin pads themselves will start to support P2P communication. It's always amazed me. People have come into my office and sat in our boardroom, and during the conversation we can say to them, you realize that the devices, the PIN debit devices we have in the US at the moment, generally just send clear text card information out the back of them. You know that, right? And people even in the processing and acquiring profession have gone, really? Yes, really. So this is why generally you don't want to put these devices on a TCP network, because then any listening device out there can go, oh, thank you, card information, card information, card information, card information. So P2PE is only just really coming into that device area. So when will P2P be available? Well, even though it's not listed on the PCI Council's website, they are available now. And the difference between them is, if you take something to your customers now that's based on P2PE, they get all of the security advantages that we're talking about. They don't have their card data environment, therefore they can sleep at night. They're not going to end up on the news, the CNN news the next day as the next Barnes & Noble that's going to be breached, because they haven't got that card information flying around. But they won't get the advantage of being able to fill out a SAC P2PE until the solution gets listed on the website. So again, you'll get the security advantage, you just won't get this compliance advantage, but that will come. So my advice is, start to think about moving towards P2PE-based solutions within the marketplace quickly, because you're really helping your customers to do that. So the second piece in there, beyond P2PE, is EMV. And EMV stands for Europay, MasterCard, Visa. It's kind of all around the rest of the world, EMV is understood, but of course Europay is not a card brand that we really see in the US. Therefore EMV doesn't make a lot of sense as an expression in the US, and it's kind of been dropped, and we talk about chip and pin. It was launched in Europe. There's over 1.5 billion EMV cards around now, and 21 million acceptance points all around the world, except in the US. So here's a map of it. You probably can't see all the details in there, but just about everywhere else in the world does EMV. The only people that don't do it is the US. And I think a couple of years ago, people were saying to me, so do you think EMV is going to come into the US? And I'm thinking, probably not. It didn't seem like it was going to happen. It seemed like the US was going to sit outside the EMV place and wait for something new to come along. And the reason being, as we just heard, our eyes popped up, whoa, look at this opportunity to sell new terminals to the merchants. I don't think the merchants really want to spend millions and millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars as an industry on devices that really just keep them in pretty much the same sort of place they've been in. It's not that big a change. It's a change, but it's not that big a change. The irony about EMV, of course, by the way, is every EMV card that's issued in the world now still has a mag stripe on it. Because until everyone is EMV, you can't really take the mag stripe off the back. And so, if you're a little cynical about this, is what has it actually achieved? You've still got the same ability to clone a card as you had previously, and wasn't that what you set out to achieve by bringing EMV in? So really, has it done a lot for the industry around the world? EMV was breached in the UK almost as soon as the UK adopted EMV. So it's not that much more secure. What it did do is gave some facilities that in Europe, the networks, the connectivity back when it was introduced wasn't that strong. So really one of the things it did was gave people the ability to do offline transactions. You could do one offline EMV transaction before you had to go and do another one online. And the chip, remember, is not just something that's read, it's something that's written to as well. So the card would be updated to say kind of loosely what the open to buy balance is, and it would give you the ability to go and run a transaction even though the internet was down or the modem was down, and you could actually complete that transaction. So myths in here are, EMV terminals are more secure. No, they're not. EMV simplifies the transaction flow. No, it doesn't. It makes it probably an order of magnitude harder. Chip replaces swipe. Well, it hasn't done yet. Okay, and the US won't adopt EMV. I heard everyone saying here just now, yes, it is, it's coming. I kind of suspect we'll never see a completely homogeneous EMV environment in the US, because I think there's going to be other technologies that come along that will start to compete with EMV. And so before EMV gets fully adopted and rolled out through the US, we would have moved on in a large way to other technologies. And we'll talk about those. So over here, generally, Visa introduced what they call their TIP program, which was the Visa Technology Innovation Program. And those dates that you got talking about before are down here. October the 1st, 2012 was the date when the device manufacturers had to be releasing EMV terminals. April the 1st, 2013, gosh, that's this year already, is the date when the processors need to have published their specifications and have EMV product available. Most of them don't at the moment, by the way. So the chance of meeting that date, not going to happen. 2015 is the proposed date, and actually this isn't being talked about at the moment. It was talked about originally that October 1st, 2015 was the date on which liability would shift, and it's the way Visa and the card associations always introduce this. And what it becomes is the big stick to make the merchants adopt it, because merchants start to find that they lose chargeback. They lose their defenses, as we started to hear it from Discover early on. And that, more than anything, drives it. It's not lower merchant services rates, it's just this fear of losing funding. And so we'll see whether that happens October 1st, 2015. When it was introduced in Canada, that first proposed date slipped. So I think it's highly probable that the US date will slip as well. Okay? You can go and look at the stuff online on those links there and find out more about this. So, chip and PIN? Well, interesting. Visa's already said that it's not going to require pins on the chips. So, really it becomes called chip and choice to us, because you're going to have this environment where some types of transactions will actually have a pin and others won't. And we kind of think, well, that's a bit scary, isn't it? But actually, it's really no different to the PIN debit credit card sort of solution we have at the moment, that sometimes you'll put a PIN in, sometimes you'll put a signature in, and the terminal will just ask you that. And so that's this chip and choice type approach that we talk about. So getting EMV to marketplace, it's going to take longer. let's not kid ourselves. The chance of it happening and being homogeneous across the US by October 1st, 2015, I just don't see it. The usual bottleneck in here is when it comes down to all of the point of sales that need to be certified. What we're saying in the industry is every point of sale product needs to certify with every processor, and there's more processors in the US than there is in any other region in the world, with every type of device that they're going to use, with every card association. That's a horrendous task. Can you imagine the queues that there'll be trying to wait for products to be certified? So gateways come in and make that easier because we do it once and make it easy for everyone to pick up. But it's still going to be the thing which is the bottleneck for certification. So EMV is certainly coming. It's certainly going to be introduced. The leading merchants will certainly roll it out there. But is it going to be the thing that everyone starts to use everywhere? I'm not so sure. I kind of got a feeling that mobile payments is going to really mature over the period of time between now and EMV, to the point where merchants get to the situation where they choose, do I go down this EMV route, or am I going to be using a more mobile-based approach that isn't EMV-based? And some people might look at me and go, Bob, what are you smoking? You know, that's not what's happening in the industry. It's just my sense about what's happening in the industry. And I thought in this session, rather than pitching you about what's really, legislated and regulated, it's more about giving you some stimulation to think about what's coming down the place. So mobile comes into two categories. There's the consumer-facing mobile, and there's the sales associate-facing mobile. So consumer-facing mobile, customers got their cell phone and they're using their mobile phone to do transaction. Sales associate-facing mobile has traditionally been, moving the application from a PC to a tablet and putting a swiper on there and using it. So consumer-facing, everyone jumped into that. This was going to be the most exciting thing ever, and so some big names jumped in. Some of them have started to jump out already. Verifone just recently said, you know what, we've been losing so much money, we can't figure out how to monetize the sale product that we purchased, that we're actually going to jump out. Maybe someone else wants to jump in and take it over, and it could be a loss leader for them, but we're not quite sure how this is going to work. That's a kind of interesting piece. Some others have been successful. We've seen Square and their sort of adoption, but Square is still based on swiping a card and having some little device that plugs into a mobile phone and working it. And I stood with someone trying to use it. It was actually kind of funny. The person was swiping away, swiping away, swiping away, swiping away. And she's saying to me, I have to swipe it fast, and then it works. And I'm saying, no, slow down. She says, no, I have to do it fast. I said, do you want me to give it to me? She gave it to me, and I went, and it worked first time. But, so I'm not sure that it's great, it's really the technology that it's cracked up to be, but it is being successful in some limited areas. What we are seeing is sales associates technology that's being pretty solid. So we've been involved in a number of solutions that have rolled out into different areas where people have transferred applications or parts of their application onto phones and mobile tablet devices and use point-to-point encryption to drive those pieces through there. So I think we are seeing some success in there. The challenge with it is that readers start to get expensive, $20 to $50 for the sort of plug-in little readers. But if you start to get high-duty cycle industrial strength devices and you need to scan, because let's face it, retail is about scanning produce as well as swiping transactions. Now you start to look at $500, $700 for the unit to wrap around, plus the device. I heard people sort of quoting me $1,500 for a tablet with a device on it. It's like, wow, this is expensive. And so hardware is starting to really constrain the adoption of this piece. It's nice to do, and it's nice to do a pilot so that organizations can say, hey, we do mobile, it's pretty cool, but are they going to roll it round through their thousands of merchant applications? It seems to be that equipment costs will limit the adoption in there. We heard a little bit about wallets, and we heard about Google and ISIS, and we support all those guys. It's kind of interesting. But they all seem to also be built around the concepts that the card is an NFC device, and it talks to an NFC reader. And Visa's actually jumped in and got some patents in this area and wants to see this happen. But the interesting piece is it still requires the merchant to do the same refurbishing of units that they've had. They've got to move to an NFC-based device. And I look at our customer base, and our customer base on aggregation is looking to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on devices. Wow, that's a lot of money for them to be spending across the way. We see that the universal solutions in these wallets, the ISIS and people like that, seem to be just struggling a little bit. The idea's there, the concept's there, but the execution in actually getting it rolled out universally, working with every point of sale in every type of merchant situation, just seems to be a little daunting. And so we saw a little spike, its interest, and then it's dropped down a little bit. And it's kind of, to me, opening the door for industry or merchant-based solutions. Like, instead of reinventing the whole world, why aren't we just reinventing some small areas of merchants that really want to do something unique and different? And I think that will happen. So thinking about the future, something to leave you with. Do our US merchants really need to spend the millions, billions of dollars on EMV adoption of these devices that have to go out? After all, 60% of cell phones that we have in our pockets now are actually capable as smartphones of doing these transactions with a wallet. And, a year ago people said it's never going to work because, cell phones don't really work inside shopping malls and, in the hotels. It can't work. And yet now, talking to the cell phone manufacturers, you see that the type of technologies in phones allows us to actually identify the location of a phone down to inches using Bluetooth LE and Wi-Fi triangulation within shopping malls, as well as the GPS type of services that you use outside. So if we can identify a merchant's phone in his pocket and know who he is and link them to their wallet as they start to queue in front of a service location in a store or enter a hotel, isn't that what we've been looking for? Because after all, at the end of the day on that, why would merchants want to spend millions and billions of dollars collectively on rechatteling their payment applications if the consumer walking in the door already has that device in their pocket that can do this transaction? So I think we're going to see a lot of change over the next 3 years about these devices taking over as payment devices and being linked in to the point of sale systems that we're seeing here in this session. And I think that's going to be really exciting because it's going to change completely the way we think about credit cards and cards themselves. There's going to have to be some changes in here because really, what does card present mean if it's a phone? You didn't swipe a card. So there has to be some kind of adoptions of this technology because we have to start to think not in terms of card present, but in terms of customer present. Was the customer there? I don't really care whether the card was there. I care whether the customer there was giving explicit approval for this transaction. So we're going to have to see some regulatory changes happening for this to really adopt. Otherwise, it's not going to. So PCI DSS merchants, burdens reducing. Will we get new PIN pads everywhere? I don't know. If we do, it's certainly going to increase the hardware manufacturer's stock. So, you might want to buy some stock in those devices. It could create some sales opportunity for you, but, is really that the right way? Or will mobile replace EMV? Will we end up in a point over the next few years where it really doesn't matter because all transactions take place on the phone? The truth of this is, it is a changing world. More so now than it's ever been before. So I'd say to you, it's really important to pick your partners wisely because who you pick as your partner and what they offer is going to make a great difference in terms of how you stay current as we move into these new technologies. And I'd like to leave you with that thought. We think Shift4 is the partner you should use, by the way, because we understand these things and we're working with them, and we look forward to working with you on providing solutions to your customers over the next few years. Now, I'm not going to put the bin round to collect your business cards, and I'm not going to ask you questions to force you to earn the right to get a $50 gift card. What I'm going to do instead is say to you, I've got 2 Microsoft Surfaces I want to give away at this session, and for you to be in the draw to win them, come by my booth, give us the business card, and we're going to find a time this afternoon to give out 2 nice new Microsoft Surface devices. And I really like these devices, by the way. They are so cool. So they're here for us. So come by our booth, see Daniel or I, Vladimir, Michelle, we're all around today. We'd love to chat with you and help you. And hands are popping up everywhere with questions. So Gary was first. Joy.
I definitely want to say we do enjoy working with Shift4 and bring a lot of value to our business. So I want to say that. But I have 2 questions for you. The first is anyone really PCI certified? And if you do get a ROC or receive compliance, how long is it good? I mean, I don't know what anyone really is, but...
For what? In what area? PCI certified to do what?
In other words, are you... I mean, we're all trying to get our merchants certified. You get that receipt compliance that says that they are doing things the right way. Is there such a thing? And if you do get a ROC, how long is it good for?
Well, typically with merchants, it's an annual piece, so they've got to do it again and again and again and again. Okay, so you do a ROC 1 year. Technically, you make this self-attestation, the simpler one, to say nothing's changed. And it's up to your QSA to go, yeah, nothing's changed, so the ROC is still good, and then the PCI Council will sort of just carry you on. You have to do that at least once every year. If your QSA says, yeah, come on a bit, things have changed, you might have to redo the ROC and do the whole process again. So it's an annual process. There's a question there.
I have a customer that needs to replace their pin pads signature capture this year. Should I be recommending they buy EMV?
Absolutely. I think to replace hardware now with devices that don't handle EMV doesn't make sense. So we partner with Ingenico, for example. Their ISC 250s, 350s, and their smaller IPP 320s are devices that are going to be the devices that are EMV used in the States. They're in EMV use in other parts of the world, and so we're in that kind of interesting space. The best scenario is when EMV starts to turn on, they'll just work and they don't need to do anything. The more likely scenario is they might need to do a firmware update on the devices, but it won't be major. So anything that's Telium platform based in Ingenico world will work.
Thank you very much. Just one other question. Given that not everyone I don't experience the friend change shops. So is there going to be a gap?
Yeah, and I think if we look at the adoption of phones, it's pretty high now. 60% of phone users are smartphone users these days. But you're right, there's always going to be that level of population below the age level and another level above. So I think we are still going to have other forms of acceptance within.
I think with that is a grocery shopping somewhere. How many people still pay with a check, a grocery check?
Well, funny thing is that checks actually seem to be having a bit of resurgence, which is interesting. I mean, we've seen in the last year more people asking about check conversion, electronic check conversion, than we've seen before, which kind of says that even merchants are thinking, you know what, checks aren't a bad thing to accept, especially if we know we can get the money and we don't have to actually take them to the bank. So we might see them around. I think there's always going to be this blended approach. It's just, do you need to actually roll out every lane in a store one way, or will you have different areas? I know going to the UK, there's a lot of self-service things around there where, you can go down the lanes or you can go into these other areas, and so percentages will change about how many go through the older way of doing it and how many go through the new way. But it's a good question. I think there was a question somewhere else over there, or yeah.
What is the current status on the card brand's perspective for certification requirements for NFC transactions, and how does that relate to the NFC?
The NFC transactions, every processor requires just there being a flag set within the messages that are sent up to say this was an NFC transaction. So it kind of, looks a little bit, it wasn't swiped. It wasn't manually entered, it was NFC. So there's a requirement to send that through. We're just doing that as a refresh basis, as every time we do a new processor refresh, we add that tag in there and sort of are driven by demand in there. So NFC is available now, and it's, what do we mean by NFC? The current method is really just, a card or a device such as a phone talking to the device, pin pad device at that level. And so the technology to drive it is actually embedded within the pin pad. And you just have to make sure that flag goes up to say it was an NFC
And
transaction.
are those transactions treated as card not present?
They're treated as card present. They're treated as card present. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks very much, everyone, and do come by and see us on our booth.